20th.
Okay, good morning. We are in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs on Friday, January 20th. And we have Maura Collins kicking us off with Ana Mejia on Zoom. Maura.
Hi, for the record, I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Thanks for having me back. I will be very quick so that we can turn it over to Ana, but I just wanted to explain why I'm here, which is that last year legislature took $1 million of general funds and allowed VHFA to expand our longstanding down payment assistance program to include grants to first generation first-time homebuyers. The language of first-generation first-time homebuyers was largely lifted from a federal bill that has not yet passed Congress, but has gotten a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, has gotten some hearings and has, I'd say, a good amount of promise that it will pass, that really looks at trying to serve those whose parents do not own their homes or did not own their homes, because we know that there is a lot of generational wealth that can be accumulated through home ownership and then can be passed on to future generations who, through having gifts when they buy their first home. And so the rules of the program, again, it follows VHFA's long-standing down payment assistance program, DPA program, where a applicant needs to have a VHFA loan, and if qualified for a VHFA loan, so it doesn't change any of the underwriting or any of the process of the home buying process, but instead of just qualifying for $15,000 of a 0% loan, first generation first time home buyers can also receive $15,000 of a grant. And there's no strings to that grant. There's no, you have to live there a certain amount of time. Some of the things that we as policymakers often would think about, you'd want some of these strings and hooks, but when you start putting those strings and hooks in place, you start getting involved in the lending process. And with that, then that becomes more debt that might have to be repaid. And so having it be a pure grant really honored the intention of what the legislature was trying to do with this program. VHFA, I'm going to just share one slide very quickly. And I'd be happy to speak more to this program and if the committee had time. This was what we learned and experienced as a part of rolling out this program. I mentioned this a little last week, that we reached out to BIPOC-led organizations as was required for the outreach and engagement of this program. And these are the things that we learned. And in talking with these organizations, it was very clear that I'm going to start at the bottom left, that they really were willing to come to the table because we had something of value, and they helped us with input on the shape and design of the program. Calling together meetings to ask people to tell their stories, sometimes opening up about problematic experiences that they had, when we had no promise of what we were going to do with that information, would not have engendered a relationship of trust. And so that was one thing we heard, was that people said, well, I'll share my story and I'll help you with this program design because I understand that it's going to help build something and provide something of value. I think that through this, it's been clear that there needs to be a place to acknowledge the lived experiences that people have had. And that can be hard sometimes for an institution to acknowledge that despite what we want to happen, what we hope is happening out there in the world, there are these experiences that individuals have, and we need to believe people and hear them and acknowledge them, because without that, it doesn't create that level of trust. We also, it's important to acknowledge that there are structural barriers to accessing home loans, and that happens at all stages of the process. I don't think that there is a bad actor out there. If there were, I think it would have been addressed. I think that these are some of the issues. I know that the chair often references color of law, but these are some underlying issues that play out through our society in many ways. And there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement there. I think the involvement by people of color and first generation homebuyers and the like is really important, so that it is not, I am not a first generation homebuyer when I first bought my home. And so I can't bring that experience directly. And it's important to have people at the table who have been involved and impacted. And lastly, we need to support people as they go through the home buying process and navigate this and try to remove barriers when we can. VHFA has been on this journey for a bit, and in doing so, we've engaged many wonderful partners who I think are interested in continuing this conversation. I don't think that $1 million is going to solve racism nor eliminate all the barriers in the home buying process. It is addressing one small issue, and that these conversations need to continue. I'm very heartened by the response I've gotten by the Vermont Bankers Association, the credit unions we've worked with, the appraisers being willing to have conversations, and the realtors and others about folks saying, yes, we'd be happy to come to the table and continue this conversation going forward. And so I don't want to overstate or overpromise what the outcome of those conversations will be. And I don't think that I would advise that this committee or any committee, any legislature, think that you all need to take action in order to address these issues. You know, a wise person told me once, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think that we do need to move slowly and be deliberative and thoughtful, because there are many issues at play here. And again, it is not a bad actor or a malintent, but these are layered impacts of decisions that we have when it comes to federal lending laws and mortgage lending requirements and the process of home buying that we've built in America.
Is that your full presentation?
Yeah, so were these impediments to our rolling it out, to your rolling it out? You have not yet rolled it out, is that right?
The program is open, and
that's what I thought.
actually, if I'm talking about how it's been rolled out, I have to say it has been wonderful. The engagement by
Exactly.
organizations and individuals with lived experience, first generation folks.
Right.
In addition, we've had, there's credit unions that are putting up their own money to match this money.
That's
So
what I
there's one
thought.
credit union who's putting up $1,000 of their own money to go with our $15,000. Another credit union is making a $150 donation to a charity of their choice. We just closed our first loan with NEFCU, and it was a New American who had NEFCU donate $150 of NEFCU's money to ALV in Chittenden County. And so it the response by lenders has been wonderful throughout this. I think, and I don't want to jump to Anna too quickly or speak for her, but I think what you'll hear though is that, again, this one program doesn't address.
Well, it wasn't
all the
intended to.
Exactly.
It was intended to address a very specific need. And I think we're proud of putting our toe in the water on this and trying to begin to address it. When you say, I would hope we would build on this program. So when you're recommending we don't do things, I mean, I'm assuming you want us to continue to support this program but hear how we might improve it and hear how we might, I mean,
there are ways, like for instance, Rhode Island has a very similar program, and their definition of first generation buyer is I'm going to say a bit better than ours. And
Yes.
we've learned from watching them that there may be a tweak there.
Right.
When you say we should continue the program, we've closed one loan and you
Yeah.
gave us $1 million. And so I'm not ready to say that we need more money.
Yeah.
But the problem we will face is that I won't really know the full demand until we get into the home buying season,
Right.
which is in the summer after you all close. And so what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that everything has to be delivered through this one program, but it's more VHFA is willing to act as a convener, facilitator of these broader industry conversations, which that may not take legislation to call us to do. It may just be just be aware and informed that these conversations are happening. Although I will go back to the very first bullet I pointed to, which is folks come to the table when you have something to build and to offer, and that does help. And so this first generation program was critical in filling that component. And so maybe as the committee goes through its work, there will be other things that evolve that you point to say, oh, this could be another fodder for conversation.
So for this year, we might tweak it, listen, and revisit it after it's been active through the home buying season.
Yep, and it's probably going to take many years, but yes, it's a journey we're on.
Right.
Just a little quick question. Is the $1 million available this year, next year, or does it continue?
It's available until it runs out. This is
Okay.
not a competitive program. You don't apply to BHFA. It's really first come, first serve, which
Okay.
is why we spent many months engaging with BIPOC-led organizations and individuals so that we could be sure they understood the program, because the legislative intent seemed to be that we really make sure that all first generation buyers were aware of this. But the money is open, available. There's information on BHFA's website, and there's participating lenders right now who offer this and are advertising it.
Good, and I've advertised it in my communications.
And we do have social media assets. Last time I was here, you asked that we do have a website where you can get, help with Facebook and Instagram or different things. So I'll make sure that you all have a fresh copy of that with the logo and the links and things like that to help spread the word to your constituents.
Thank you.
I have a technical question, a philosophical question. One, I hope and imagine you're getting very granular when we talk about BIPOC, because we know sometimes the dust settles and we haven't necessarily helped Black homeowners help Black Americans become homeowners in any way. And I want to make sure we, have really detailed demographic information about
In terms of
being
data,
helped. Yeah.
yes. And I want to say BHFA's experience is that just about a third of people do not disclose their race.
Mhm.
And when we talk with BIPOC-led, and I should have said that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color, when we talk with organizations serving this population, they say that probably won't change because there is a worry, especially with so much online lending, that
Yeah.
if I don't have to check that box,
Right,
I'm not
right.
going to. I don't want to disclose this any more than I need to. And so, yes, we are asking detailed questions about race, and I am not sure what we're going to get, and we can't let that be a barrier to accessing this program.
Right.
Finally, I just, my understanding has always been that a huge component of the wealth gap is homeownership. And that probably has worsened with high rents for renting population versus huge home value increases for homeowners. Is there anything you can tell us about increases in the wealth gap, or, anything that really this program is going to try and address something huge in our.
Well, we know that the racial homeownership gap has only widened since we passed fair housing legislation. And so that is problematic. We know that nationally, and I'm going to round my numbers, but I think the US homeownership rate is like 67, 68%, and Vermont's is 72%. So that's better. But that the Black homeownership rate nationally is in the low 40s, like 42%. And in Vermont, it's only 21%. And so we have a bigger gap and discrepancy than most other states.
Now, does part of that have to do with where the individual was born who is being counted? In other words, there are new Americans who are Black, and then there are Black Americans who have been here for centuries. And there's no breakdown, is there, that separates the two for statistical purposes.
You're right.
So if you have a higher percentage of new Americans in Vermont than you have elsewhere, that would affect the number. And do we know if that's the case?
Do we know if we have a higher proportion of new Americans than other states?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Because that would be, to me, very important to understand whether or not the statistic is meaningful.
Yep, I can see that. And yet it's one that we probably need to continue to address either way, because with this, if there's that much of a discrepancy, we do need to do something, because we know that homeownership wealth is the #1 asset of
Sure.
middle class
But the other
Americans.
thing, though, that we would also be asking is we look at other statistics how does this affect new Americans who are not BIPOC?
Mhm,
Is there a discrepancy there
mhm.
Right, good.
in the number?
And then how one defines a new American, at what point does new become old? And, you know, we've had a refugee resettlement program since the eighties, and how does this play out throughout? And that's why I think, while we like to ground our information in data, we also, it's important to have the conversations and the lived experience and the personal stories, like I think you're gonna hear next, which help to put some flavor to some of these conversations.
Great segue. Thanks so much, Maura. You're welcome to stay in that chair if you'd like. Thanks so much for joining us, Anna. You have about 15 minutes. So if you wanted to take most of that time to speak, you can, or you can leave a little bit of time for questions, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. My name is Anna Mejia. I live in Heartland, Vermont, and I'm a homeowner. In my spare time, I teach workshops on financial wellness and home buying for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, alongside my co-visionary, Shonda Williams. I'm here to share my experience buying a home and the barriers that I encountered throughout the process as a non-white Vermonter, and the ways that the state can make affordable housing more accessible to Vermonters like myself. And I do urge you to take action. I think there's lots of things that the legislator can do to improve accessibility to affordable housing and homeownership. So some of the barriers that I faced are pretty common for other first-time home buyers, like not having access to a full 20% down payment, the limited housing stock in Vermont, and even more so the even more limited affordable housing stock, and a competitive housing market. But really, one of the biggest barriers that I encountered, which doesn't apply to 94% of the Vermont population, is the structural and institutional racism. Throughout the lending process, I experienced discrimination at every step. First, there was lenders who didn't follow up with me. Excited to start the mortgage application process and find out how much I could afford, what I could get approved for. I made an appointment at my local bank, Mascoma. They're a local lender. I came prepared with copies of my last 3 tax returns, last month's pay stubs, bank account statements, a written account of my employment for the last 2 years, and everything else that I knew was going to be requested. This lender didn't want to consider me for a conventional loan, even though I had an excellent credit score and I was planning to put at least 3% down payment. They said that someone from the Rural Development USDA loan department would follow up with me, but no one ever did. And after some weeks, I called back. I let them know that nobody ever reached out to me. And the lender who had done the intake interview was surprised, said that that doesn't happen, and still nobody followed up with me. While I had better luck applying online, where I avoided disclosing my race, I was quoted with higher rates than those available through VHFA programs and charged with extra fees at almost every step. I was quoted with higher interest rates than advertised on VHFA loans, despite being explicit about wanting a VHFA mortgage loan program. It took over 3 weeks after applying to get a loan estimate for the VHFA loan option that I was interested in. And this is considerably longer than the industry standard of 3 business days. The bank tried to increase my PMI, citing a clerical error. And they also tried to charge extra fees that they claimed were required by VHFA, which they weren't. They were also uninformed on administering VHFA programs. I was interested in a mortgage credit certificate, and that was one of the things that they tried to charge extra fees for. And when I pushed back, because I did push back at every step, wanting like, why are you increasing these fees? Why are you adding this other fee? One of the responses that I got was, "We're sorry, we haven't done this program before. This is our first time doing this." And the way that I was able to fight back and push back on some of these increases in fees is I went online and I researched and read like the program rules. And so that's where I was able to see like, yeah, they actually can't charge me this fee. I shouldn't be expected to do that. If you are a lender and you are administering a VHFA loan program, that should be their responsibility. Other issues that I dealt with were lack of communication throughout the process. And I also encountered issues with the appraiser who was given 9 weeks to perform the appraisal, missed the deadlines, and refused to commit to conducting the appraisal before the closing date. The lender offered no support. They told me to reach out to the appraiser. And with the appraiser not having completed the report the week before closing and refusing to commit to doing it before closing, I had to arrange for another appraiser to get it done with 3 days notice. They were able to get it done, and they said, I'm going to have to charge you a rush fee because this is a obviously accelerated timeline. Even with the rush fee, I ended up paying less than what the other appraiser was trying to charge me. Again, they had sat on this appraisal for 9 weeks and did not want to commit to doing it before my closing date. And you might wonder why I continued working with this bank despite my experiences. And the answer was that they could provide me with a $10,000 down payment assistance grant that other banks couldn't. In fact, I started working with another bank, but their grant funds had run out. So they encouraged me because it was a significant amount, $10,000. They said, you would have better luck reaching out to another bank who may still have access to those funds. So that's what I did. And as you know, it's been a highly competitive housing market. And while the down payment assistance programs helped make homeownership more attainable, it didn't level the playing field. Offers that were contingent on approval for the down payment assistance grants, like those through the housing trust, were not attractive to sellers. In the end, I had to drop that contingency in the offer letters. And while the shared equity programs that initially really attracted me, and overall, I still think that they're a great idea, I also had a hard time coming to terms with the fact that if I were to sell the house down the line, I'd only retain 25% of that equity. So it's not as effective as for building wealth. So while so far I've talked about the racial discrimination I've experienced through the lending process, the reality is that structural and institutional racism impeded my access to homeownership way before I even stepped foot in the bank to apply for a home loan. One way that racism manifests and impedes BIPOC homeownership is lower wages when compared to our white counterparts. According to a 2021 American Community Survey data, Latinas make 54 cents for every dollar earned by a white man. For Native American women, it's 51 cents. For Black women, it's 58 cents. And for white women, it's 83 cents. This pay disparity not only decreased the amount of savings I had available to purchase a home, but also my overall purchasing power because if I had higher wages, I could be approved for a higher loan. So to ground all of that in reality for you, I directly experienced wage theft while working my first full-time job in Vermont. This was here where I live in the Upper Valley at Vital Communities. I only just received a check this week for these stolen wages, which amounts to $5,400 and some change. This check comes after 2 years of quitting my job at this racist organization and 1 year after first raising the issue about the wage theft when they initially tried to pay me off with $377. If you're wondering, that check did not come with an apology or any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But wage theft aside, I was also held back from advancement opportunities and retaliated against for speaking up about racial inequities. After I left, the person that they hired to take over my position, who had less qualifications in both education and in experience, was quickly promoted to a manager. And what I learned is that if I had an extra N in my name and I was white, I would have been manager material. This is the reality for people of color in Vermont, especially women of color. The situation gets worse when you look at people of color who work in industries that are exempt from minimum wage laws, like agricultural workers and tip workers in the restaurant industry. And while I'm speaking directly about the barriers I've personally encountered in the home buying process as a non-white Vermonter, home ownership is only a fractional piece of the affordable housing puzzle. Everyone in this room knows that we are in very short supply of affordable housing options. And because home ownership has long been inaccessible to non-white Vermonters, BIPOC Vermonters make a disproportionate share of the renter population. So I'd be remiss to not name the challenges that renters, especially BIPOC renters, are facing in this moment of time. In my hometown of Heartland, an out-of-state developer bought a building that houses our general store, which everyone was quick to celebrate. We get to keep our general store, it gets to keep functioning. And that developer then proceeded to increase rents from $950 to $1,700. But that wasn't enough. Then they proceeded to evict all of those tenants with no cause in the middle of winter. This developer did the same thing in Quechee last February. And it's going to continue to happen if we don't do anything to stop it, because as of this moment, it's totally legal to evict a tenant for no reason at all. While across the Connecticut River, on the New Hampshire side, this isn't legal. Why do we allow it to happen here? Our affordable housing stock shrinks when we allow this to happen, and it's happening all over the state, from Essex to Brattleboro. Since the pandemic, no-cause evictions have accounted for about 50% of all evictions. This is alarming. And oftentimes tenants are forced to choose between affordable housing or safe and healthy housing. I've heard stories of tenants who have gone extended periods without adequate heat, with mold infestations and other code violations. Some fear reporting these issues to their landlord because of fear of retaliation. And for those that do report it, the issue isn't always resolved. So while you're working on your housing bill, I implore you to address these barriers to affordable and safe housing. We have the solutions at our fingertips. With regards to initiatives aimed at reducing the race gap in homeownership, I would like to see this committee and the housing organizations invited to turn to experts on this and work with them to identify the real barriers and design solutions tailored to those specific barriers. And by experts, I don't mean the executive directors or the program directors at VHFA or VHCB or lenders or housing trust. I mean those who have been shut out and deprived of safe and affordable housing. From my standpoint, we keep relying on people who don't experience these problems to come up with solutions, and we keep coming up short. I also want to name the disconnect that often occurs between the way a program is designed and how it's implemented. These programs must be implemented fairly to have a positive impact, and I can tell you from my experience that there are challenges currently in the implementation of these programs. That, coupled with the lack of oversight on landlords and even lenders, is problematic. I knew that what I experienced in my home buying process wasn't right, but there wasn't anyone I could turn to make a complaint and trust that somebody would follow up or be able to make things better. So in terms of policy solutions that I believe would address these housing issues, I would say let's start with removing the sub-minimum wage exemptions that disproportionately impact BIPOC populations. And to take it a step further, let's follow New York's example, which recently instituted a wage transparency law. To directly address the affordable housing issue, down payment assistance programs aren't enough. I would like to see some oversight entity where home buyers can come to with grievances and trust that they'll be followed up. I know the Land Access and Opportunity Board is exploring programs and solutions, and I encourage you to hear testimony from those individuals and those with direct experience in confronting these barriers to affordable housing. For renters, we need tenant protections that ban no-cause evictions. We need more regulation and oversight on rentals, a registry and a place for people to report problems. And again, trust that somebody will follow up. And so these are just a few solutions. I heard Maura caution this body to feel like you need to take action. And I do think there are current problems here, especially for renters, that we do need to take action now. Otherwise, the problem will get worse. And this Monday, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day. And one of the things that I did in honor and remembrance of his legacy was reading the letter from Birmingham jail. And one of the things that always sticks with me is hearing people constantly tell people who are oppressed to wait, to be patient. And we are tired of waiting. We are tired of being patient. There is never a right time. If we keep being asked to wait, wait is always equivalent with never. So I implore you again to take action. And here are some of the ways that I have outlined on how we can take action to improve, to promote affordable and safe housing for Vermonters.
Thanks so much, Anna. Do you want to take a couple questions? I think I saw at least two. Senator Cummings, did you?
No, I just wondered when she was having difficulty with the bank and understanding, did you have a realtor working with you or for you?
I was working with a realtor.
And the realtor couldn't work through and advise you about the requirements and how to work through that?
It wasn't that the realtor wasn't advising me, it was that the bank kept trying to increase it to make to sneak in extra fees and all of that. I don't believe that it's the realtor's responsibility to make sure, I mean, they're to ensure that they're not increasing those rates. I think it's on the bank, and especially if the bank that I worked with was a VHFA lender. It was a specific VHFA mortgage product. And I feel like there is some response and some oversight that could have been done by an entity like VHFA or even something external.
Did you file a complaint with banking and insurance?
I
Or
had
the
no
state
idea how
would
to. I
file?
don't even know who they would be. I did make a complaint with the bank, and then they did change initially the mortgage officer. But even then they said like they don't have like the mortgage officer, they had like the lead mortgage, the senior mortgage officer. It wasn't like a step up, it was just someone with more experience. And so they reassigned my loan to somebody else.
Because if banks are adding, working with racial discrimination and they're adding fees that they wouldn't normally, they should be reported and sanctioned by the state. But we gotta have people report it. So maybe the thing is, what do you do if you feel you're being discriminated against? I was a realtor. I've sold several homes to people of color and have never had a problem. So it's just interesting to hear.
Yeah, and I would say that that's also one of the challenges in sharing our stories, is that hearing some feedback of, well, I didn't experience that, and sometimes that being said as a way to discount my own experience. I know what I experienced, and it's great to hear that you didn't experience that. And I'll say I was at a point in time where I was experiencing the discrimination from so many angles, from work. And this was in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd and not seeing any justice. Period out, I had very real reasons to feel like even if I reported something, nothing would happen. I didn't even know where to start to report.
Okay, so we need to figure out how to fix that.
And I just, if I may just add on to the things I'm hearing that need to be fixed. VHFA met Anna after her home buying process. And so I didn't know this was going on. And it does make one question, how often is this going on? How pervasive? What role and responsibilities does VHFA have in this as well? And so we do pride ourselves in our outreach and training to realtors, to lenders. Everyone has our outreach person's home cell phone, and access feels there, but clearly it's not, because some of this could have been cleared up by our engagement and involvement, which wasn't there because we had no idea. So we need to look at that system. And so if I could just say, I very much am worried about like moving too fast in the lending process, because there's so much involved. I'd hate for the legislature to make a move that all of a sudden means that loans couldn't be sold on the secondary market to Fannie and Freddie or something like that. I mean, there's big repercussions I think we need to understand. But Anna's point about, well, Maura's saying don't do anything, and Anna clearly has recommendations. Much of what I heard Anna say, I actually would endorse. And I do think there's things that the legislature can do and look at when it comes to the totality of the process. I was kind of speaking very specifically about the lending process, but I think that already my mind is going about things after hearing this story, and that's where we need a better feedback loop and a better, make things easier for customers so that they don't feel so alone and the need to advocate to the extent that Anna did. So thank you. Senator Clarkson.
So Anna, thank you. I really appreciate your sharing your story and taking the time to do that. As your senator, I am disappointed that somehow we didn't connect, because I would have been happy to be a direct link with you to VHFA right away. So in future, I would hope we could connect. I mean, we're connecting now, which is great. But your state reps and your senators are here for you and would be happy to help in future. I'm just curious, the date that you bought your house or began the work on at your house, was it 2020 also?
Yeah, I bought the house in 2020. When I started, I think started looking was 2019, but I closed on the house in September of 2020.
Okay, great. And anyway, I just really appreciate, we know we have a huge amount of work to do in this arena. We've begun it. We in good faith are moving forward. The legislature can be fairly slow sometimes, but we have a very strong social equity caucus. We are working on these things in most committees in some capacity. And I really appreciate your story here, because oddly, both Vital Communities and Mascoma are at the table, particularly on housing issues in this Keys to the Valley program that we have launched big time in the Upper Valley about on all these issues surrounding housing. So it's so ironic that two of the players here in your story are actually actively involved in trying to solve the problem. So let's maybe work together on this going forward, because there's so much intent to do better, and we just need to figure out how we can do that together.
Yeah, I want to respond. Like, this is where, Mara's point was also about trust. And so when I see committees like first reach out to the big, lending institutions, and including like the nonprofits that claim to want to support people, like Vital Communities and Mascoma, like, what does that say to people like me? Does that make me feel like if I come to the table, I will be heard, when I have already come directly to those bodies and have been shut out and been silenced? So again, about the trust piece.
I'm sorry, they had initiated this piece. I mean, they're the ones who initiated the process of trying to do better. Sorry, I guess I hadn't made that clear. They initiated that work on housing. And anyway, so we need to clearly do a better job, and thank you for your testimony. Really appreciate it.
I want to thank you, Anna. It's really brave to share your story. And of course, it's uncomfortable. And so sometimes we want to move through the discomfort quickly and find, a solution. But I think we will sit with your story, and we know it represents a lot of other people who don't have the time or capacity to come forward and share this. We will still seek them out. We will not let that be a barrier to trying to hear their voices. Thank you also for the work you're doing to help other people in the homeownership process. Any other barriers you feel you can reflect back to us, or that you talk to people in the process who want to speak with us, we really welcome that. I feel like, because you've been so brave, I just want to say I had a really bad experience after grad school just a few years ago, trying to get a home improvement loan from one of our credit unions that talks a very big game. And even after the end of the process, they wanted to put my small home improvement loan in escrow and make me show them receipts before drawing the money, while they were still charging me monthly for the loan, potentially before I even got any money. And I felt like, wow, I'm a former state legislator who, just graduated from, a master's program. And I am having trouble getting a small home improvement loan to start my own business. And, it is extremely real. And it is often hard to sit there and think, is it because I'm a woman of color? Is it because access to capital is so difficult? But the more you feel these things, the more you just want to give up and figure out another state to call home. So, thank you for staying in Vermont and fighting for other people, so that we do have a continually more welcoming and diverse state. And we really, really appreciate your testimony. You're here.
Thank you.
yeah, please stay in touch with us. Hopefully you know how to reach us now. Thanks so much, Tamara, as well. You know, we need our institutions to help bring these voices here and to accept critical feedback in a very public way. And we appreciate that. It's a great model for what all of our institutions need to be doing.
I just want to underscore, Anna mentioned the Land Access and Opportunity Board,
Yes.
another initiative the legislature passed last year. VHCB is the staffing support for that, although that is its own governance and own run organization and effort. And so I think I just want to echo what Anna said about hopefully this committee will have time to reach out to that group. And while they are on a path in terms of writing a formal report and making recommendations to the legislature, it also may be a group of interested folks who would feel affirmed by sharing experiences with land and homeownership access and the limits that they felt with that.
Yeah, we definitely want to work on that testimony. We didn't know if, you know, we want it to coincide with the housing bill, if they have recommendations for the housing bill. And people from that group have started to reach out to me informally, but I will say while we're live, you know, I really want those folks to feel comfortable speaking in our committee or to each of us privately as we, you know, might pass a homeownership and housing bill before the February 15th deadline out of this committee. Who knows? It's still very ambitious, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity. Let's finish. Thank you, Mark. Ellen, thanks so much for your patience. So I suppose before we have you get started on this bill, where you hold, you know, the first and maybe the largest piece in terms of volume of pages, we are now about to start walking through a draft omnibus housing bill. Oh, this is for me. You'll see, you know, my name at the top as a current stage formality. We have the opportunity to listen to a lot of pieces of policy around housing and homeownership that have come to us from different places, and see if we can build consensus and find common ground to make this a committee bill. If we can't find that common, we can actually take a vote then on that committee bill, and it doesn't have to be a unanimous vote for it to be a committee bill, or we can decide that instead we want it to be a bill that has specific senators' names on it. So I just put that out for the committee and the general public as the process point that we're in, to start looking at language. You know, the only other thing I'll say is I don't know that this is a full skeleton. It's an arm, it's a foot, it's, you know, really important pieces, and it's not the end all be all. We are interested in hearing all ideas to help address a housing crisis that we've been hearing about over the last couple of weeks, and that we've been hearing about from our constituents and our employers for many months before that. Thank you, Ellen, for being here and starting us on the bill.
Sure. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here on draft request 23-0091, 23-91. That's the draft request number. It doesn't have an S number yet. We can all discuss when and if you're going to proceed on that. But for the moment, this is a draft bill. So I, as you may recall, handle land use issues. So this is a bill primarily related to housing. So my part of that are land use issues. So that includes municipal zoning and Act 250, and then a couple of other sort of miscellaneous issues. I have the first 20 pages of this bill that I have drafted, but then also Damian Leonard, Rebecca Wasserman, and David Hall contributed language to the rest of the bill, so you will be hearing from them as well. But I'm going to walk you through the first 20 pages. So first, this bill hasn't been edited, so I've already found typos. Please bear with us. The other thing I want to flag on line 8 is that our sort of placeholder title that was included is expanding access to safe and affordable housing, which was the name of S226 last year that you passed.
Right.
So you don't have to change it if you want. If you want to have the same name as last year, you can. But I did just want to flag as something you may want to consider as you continue to work on this bill.
Thanks, Blair.
Okay, so section 1 on page 1 of the bill. Oh, and so this is draft 5.1 dated 1/19/2023, 5:31 p.m. It is posted on your website today under David Hall's name, I believe. Yes. So you can find it on the website. So section 1 on page 1 of the bill. The following sections, most of what I'm going to talk about relate to municipal zoning. So the first section amends 24 VSA 4414. These are types of zoning that are permissible regulations for towns to include. And so the first first topic is parking. So a municipality may adopt provisions setting forth standards for permitted and required facilities for off-street parking and loading, which may vary by district and by uses within each district. That's the existing law. However, a municipality shall not require more than one parking space per dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit. So this is a change. Currently, municipalities handle parking differently. Some establish a required amount of parking space per dwelling unit or per bedroom. So the towns handle it differently, but this is establishing a sort of across the board requirement that towns cannot require more than one parking space per dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit.
We can do questions as we go, I imagine.
Okay, no, this is just with my former mayor's hat
Yes.
in a city that has parking issues. You may require only one parking space, but since frequently families, because they work places that don't have public transportation, have two cars, where is the community supposed to put the second car? Especially when you can't park on the street if there is space on a day like this, and that's the balancing issue you're gonna come up against.
Yes, and I think you will need to consider that
Right.
as you move forward. The other response is that this is dictating what a municipality is allowed to do. A developer developing a property is allowed to include more, but the municipality cannot require more than one parking space.
And I think, it's good to get concerns out into the world because we're gonna have a lot of witnesses who wanna address those concerns, add to those concerns, whatever the case may be. So, flag any and all things.
So jumping down to line 20, in determining the number of parking spaces for non-residential uses and size of parking spaces required under these regulations, the appropriate municipal panel may take into account the existence or availability of employer transit paths or rideshare programs, public transit routes, public parking spaces available. So there's still, this is not limiting the parking spaces for commercial or industrial businesses, just in the residential sector. And then, so I'm on page 2, line 4 to 6. You will notice there is language that is struck. This is language that you actually added last year in S226, and that language said that municipalities cannot require an accessory dwelling unit to have more than one parking space per bedroom. And so that language is being struck because it's being rolled into the language on the prior page and changing it to one parking space for the entire dwelling unit.
Per dwelling,
Per dwelling unit, yeah.
right. So if there is an accessory dwelling unit, it would have a separate from the homeowner.
Yes.
Right, but you couldn't require more than one.
So that's duplicative.
No, well,
It's sort of
It
duplicative.
would be if you left it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Or contradictory.
it actually would be contradictory technically because this was allowing them to set one per bedroom as
Right.
opposed to for the whole unit. So that was just this small difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Senator Garrett.
Yeah, that'd be an unusual accessory dwelling, to have more than one bed, but you're right, most of it would be. Does the statute allow for shared parking where locations or properties that have different owners can share parking if they have an agreement? Because that can really be effective in reducing the total amount of parking.
I believe so. So it allows that a municipality adopt provisions on how they want to handle parking issues. And so this isn't changing that aspect,
Okay.
except to the extent that they can't require more than one parking. So a municipality potentially has the ability to do that.
Okay, great.
Does this do anything to parking replacement fees? Yeah. During my time, the municipalities were allowed to, or impact fees, that you could charge. We've charged some change of use developers large amounts for to replace that second parking space.
So I don't think this is impacting that, but I'm actually not familiar specifically with that type of impact fee, so I will look into that.
It was during the state's discouraging growth years. But I think they still exist. At least I haven't heard them repealed when I've been in this building.
All right, so I'm on page 2, section 2. Section 2 amends 4412 in Title 24. So we're still in the municipal zoning chapter. And so there are multiple, this section 2 has multiple concepts in it, so I will stop after each one. So the first, starting on line 15, well, starting on line 10, the following provisions apply to every municipality. So these provisions will override any existing zoning that already exists, and the town has to abide by them. So starting on line 15, this is existing language, but bylaws shall designate appropriate districts and reasonable regulations for multi-unit or multifamily dwellings. No bylaw shall have the effect of excluding these multi-unit or multifamily dwellings from the municipality. I'm going to stop there. That's existing statute. It says that municipalities have to allow multi-unit or multifamily dwellings somewhere in the municipality. However, it doesn't say everywhere or everywhere. Many towns, some towns limit it to a single district where they allow the multi-unit. They're allowed to sort of limit currently where they do that as long as they provide somewhere in the town for them. But so the new language starting on line 18 sort of changes that a bit. So first, in any district that allows residential development, duplexes and accessory dwelling units shall be an allowed use. Currently, under statute, towns are allowed to have residential zoning districts where they only allow single-family dwelling units. So this is changing that to say residential zones need to allow duplexes and accessory dwelling units. Next, in any district that is served by municipal water and sewer service that allows residential development, multi-unit dwellings with 4 or fewer units shall be an allowed use. This is going a step further, saying in residential districts that have municipal water and sewer, the town has to allow multi-unit dwellings with up to 4 units.
Big deal.
Big deal, straightforward.
Yeah, no, it's good that it's clear. May I ask you a question? Could the town put a maximum number of accessory dwelling units in its code?
So we're gonna talk about accessory dwelling units on the next page.
Okay.
Currently accessory dwelling units have to be accessory to a dwelling unit. And so it has to be directly associated with one other unit. There are towns currently that allow up to 2 accessory dwelling units per primary unit. So that isn't being changed at all here. But this is setting the floor of accessory dwelling units shall be an allowed use. Did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Well, just so that I'm clear. So what the state is going to require is that at least one accessory dwelling unit be allowed.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'm sure it's intentional that it's water and sewer, not
Yes.
right, just water or sewer.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Page 3. So page 3, we're still in the zoning language, and subdivision E that starts on line 1 is the accessory dwelling unit definition. slash regulation section. So except, I'm gonna go through the whole thing because I think it will be part of this conversation as well. Except for flood hazard and fluvial erosion area bylaws adopted under 4424, no bylaw shall have the effect of excluding as a permitted use one accessory dwelling unit that is located within or appurtenant to a single family dwelling. And the language is struck on an owner occupied lot. So this is the first change in this section. Currently, an accessory dwelling unit is a dwelling unit associated with a single family residence where the owner lives on the lot. This is a recent change. Previously, the owner needed to live in the larger unit, and then this committee recently changed it to they had to be living on the lot, so the owner could live in the accessory dwelling unit if they wanted and rent the larger unit. So this is the first change, just removing the owner occupancy.
We had long discussions about this in our committee. I really have a problem with removing this. It changes the whole tenor of the neighborhood. It can change the whole tenor of the neighborhood. And that was the discussion we had last year, and I have a real flag on that. I mean, yeah, anyway, we had, it's a big deal to have the continued owner living there and being part of the community, as opposed to just having another rental unit. Otherwise, it just becomes another rental unit, commercial unit. And that's what we're hoping for, at least in my understanding of accessory dwelling units, is there. It's still residential. It's not a commercial thing. It's an opportunity for owner occupied lots. And otherwise you just become a landlord and you have commercial properties, and that's not necessarily what our neighborhoods want.
Well, you have residential renters. I don't know that we want that.
That's
Well,
properties.
if I'm renting it, is there anything that forbids me from renting short term? Are we
It depends
making
on the
easy-
town.
I mean, are we making it easier for me to stick a bedroom and a bath out over my garage and put it on Airbnb?
Well, that depends on the town, because each town has, hopefully, we created the opportunity several years ago for each town to set its own ordinance on short-term rentals.
We did put funding into helping homeowners with ADU development where we had more parameters that would discourage short-term rental unit creation. We can't necessarily tell people otherwise what to do if our laws are silent about
I mean,
what.
traditionally, accessory dwelling units, there's at least 2 on my street, were for aging parents, usually mothers. And then they usually used by teenagers. One has been converted just to make the original house larger. The other one is sitting vacant. But access was actually through the main house. Yeah, this is another world. If we're talking about putting strangers, non-related individuals, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the policy, the policy principles. We could potentially hear from people that are, it makes it affordable now to live in their home, to rent out a part of it and have there be some separation rather than renting a room in their home. We heard that 69% of Vermonters, are 2-person households or less. And we know that our housing stock means that there probably means a lot of empty space where they might need the income to make that all
Take a
work.
look at fire codes, because what was.
That's,
Okay.
I was gonna say, just
What was
wait.
the
just take a
bedroom in
breath.
my house, which is large,
Mhm.
it's an attic room, does not meet window size for fire codes. I sold my daughter's house. She was listed as a 3-bedroom house. I can't list that as more than 2 because the windows are not large enough for an adult human wearing a full fire pack to get through. And it's a good code, but it has cut out some of the bedroom availability that was previously there. So now we have, and I couldn't turn it into an accessory unit because skylights don't count.
I think we're gonna get to that very question. And it's a good one.
And not to add further confusion, I do think, to Senator Clarkson's point, you should consider the elements of the ADU definition, because the change on the prior page that allows duplexes everywhere that a single family dwelling unit is currently allowed, that sort of changes, I think, how accessory dwelling units play into that system, because they are also allowed to the same extent. So there is there's more ubiquity in this system where properties are going to be allowed to be turned into duplexes under the language.
That's fine, but they're not they're multi-unit. That's different. An accessory dwelling unit in this committee, we discussed it long and hard, and happy to continue to have that conversation, but we talked about the tenor of the neighborhood, keeping that anchor of owner occupied with an accessory dwelling unit. It was accessory to a full-time owner who lived in that neighborhood and not, I mean, so fine, you can have multi-units, that's great. We want lots of multi-units. Just saying, I'm just putting a pin in it. I'm not asking for us to have that discussion. And just, that was an important part of, that distinguishes, in my mind, accessory dwelling unit from a multi-unit commercial unit. Which is fine. They're great to have, but it's not an accessory dwelling unit. It's accessory to a full-time life in a neighborhood. The people who already live there.
Okay. So the next change, starting on line 4 on page 3, a bylaw shall require a single family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit to be subject to the same review, dimensional or other controls as required for single family dwellings without an accessory dwelling unit. The may is being changed to shall. I think previously the may was in regards to towns not requiring any kind of regulation, but I think you may hear testimony that towns have started to potentially include more restricted regulation on ADUs, and so this is requiring that they be treated the same as single family dwelling.
So would setbacks be an example of that kind of regulation?
Yes.
Okay.
So glad you're here with your local knowledge. It's very helpful.
Next, the criteria for conversion of an existing detached non-residential building to a habitable space for an accessory dwelling unit shall not be more restrictive than the criteria used for a single family dwelling without an accessory dwelling unit. So for example, like a garage or a carriage house that is pertinent to the single family unit. Okay, so those are the changes related to accessory dwelling units. The rest of the definition is further on this page for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time with it. So it's a distinct unit that is clearly subordinate to a single family dwelling and has facilities and provisions for independent living, including sleeping, food preparation, and sanitation, provided that there's sufficient wastewater capacity, and the unit does not exceed 30% of the total habitable floor space of the single family unit or 900 square feet, whichever is greater. So that's the existing definition.
So it has to have kitchen facilities.
Yeah.
Which none of the accessory units on my street, the grandmother apartments, had. They were separate bed baths,
Okay.
but you ate with the family. Once you have to add a kitchen, you're adding an apartment.
Well, that's what we actually,
Yeah.
it was part of our law last year.
Right.
Was our ADU
Right.
required it to be a separate unit.
Right.
Fully.
And then give some funding so you could create a kitchen, you know, I think people informally do kitchenette type things, but then you're not maybe changing the use and making it a separate living space.
Yes, the existing underlying definition for accessory dwelling unit has been in statute since 1992. I'm just gonna check. So, and this committee has made a few tweaks over the years. The 900 square feet was made a couple of years ago. But I think the underlying, like clearly subordinate to a unit has been in statute for quite a while.
Do I have to follow fire codes and put in hardwired fire, detectors and sprinklers in this accessory dwelling unit?
I believe if you're renting it, I mean,
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
rent anything.
So,
So there was, we were silent on, it could be a long-term, I mean, we, in many cases, we're hoping that ADUs will be long-term rentals. And so one assumed, if it's a living unit, if it's a unit
if
where
it's
people are
rented
living,
to the
you have to,
public,
rent it to
it
the
has
public,
to
you gotta
have
have everything.
hardwired
No, that-
and it has to have sprinklers.
And
Not by us.
I don't, yeah,
It doesn't
I think
need
that's a
sprinklers.
certain story of building.
Right, the fire code is
Yeah.
pretty complicated,
And it's
and
coming up.
Damien will be,
In change of
Right.
use, it does, change of use.
In Brattleboro, it doesn't. I have an apartment in my house, actually.
Right.
But this is helpful.
but you have homes, we aren't required to have sprinklers.
Exactly.
Right, because you can pretty
Except
much
in
do
Montpelier
anything in your
for
house.
several years.
Oh, okay.
We did do away with that 2 years ago. It was
I-
very expensive.
There is a whole section on, let's make sure everybody understands fire safety and is it all making sense, for the type of building, but you don't, sprinklers are a huge change and that's not required in any
We're about
homes.
the only state where you can't have one of those little latches where you can put the gas nozzle in. And you have to stand there and hold it. And that was the fire code that we did for this state.
Just to comment, I think, and we can deal with it later. There are some co-housing facilities or developments that have been proposed where you have units for retirees, basically, who don't want a whole house with a kitchen, for example. And they have a shared kitchen. So I don't think we necessarily need to make this language allow that, if we do want to allow that, but perhaps that could be some other definition of
There is
a type of,
Yeah,
because they're really effective at getting folks to move out of the big houses where just one person lives. And I think they would
Kind
be
of
a
like an
nice.
SRO.
well, there is
Kind of, it's almost like a college dorm
Right.
situation or
Yeah.
cabins where you'd have safe, small units and then a common kitchen and
there's
eating
this one.
facility.
Bristol, your favorite town.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's one that's proposed. I don't think it's inside the city limits, but around Montpelier. And it's almost like you all have your own house, but then there is a central place where you all eat together.
Right, right,
It's
exactly. And you may want kitchens.
kind of like an old commune. I mean,
Exactly. And you may want kitchens in the smaller places, but you may not.
Yeah,
It
So-
may be more of a kitchenette kind of thing.
Maybe.
yeah, you probably want to.
But that's been a barrier. There's
Yeah.
one in process now in Vermont somewhere that I'll
Mhm.
find. I'll
Yeah.
find it again.
Yeah,
I think we want to talk about those types of housing as a new frontier to help,
Yes.
help people who need different types of
Absolutely.
housing situations. So we'll,
As we
Like-
talk about home sharing.
Yeah.
we
Right,
just
I'm
made
just
it
mentioning-
expansive.
we'll let that simmer.
Mentioning it now.
Because we have a
Yeah.
whole section on home share that we can expand on, and because there are now multiple
Right.
Okay, great.
versions of
Home share SROs, which is that dormitory conversion to kind of
Right,
supportive housing or congregate,
right. Very
common
similar.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should tell you, my planning commission in one of my communities has already invited us all in.
Oh, good. Field trip. So we'll talk later about our field trips now becoming maybe
No, it's
weekday
not a
just
field trip.
committee.
They're not happy with some of the proposals.
Oh, that's
It's a different kind
still
of
a
field
field
trip.
trip.
You want to go to my place?
Wow. We'll try to invite people here or go to people to hear their thoughts. So how does it field trip?
Well, maybe it would be good to do.
And Brattleboro has actually done a lot of these things already and has implemented them.
Yeah, I think
and
this is one
it's
of
happy
the,
with
this
them.
is one of the smaller towns.
Mhm.
Not the big, my 3 or 4 big cities, 2 or 3.
We'll make sure we hear from towns of different sizes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
It's loss of control. I don't think it's anything we're doing in particular. It's that we are taking their control of their town away.
all right, page 3, line 19.
Good boy.
In any district served by municipal water, sewer and water infrastructure that allows residential development, bylaws shall establish lot and building dimensional standards that allow 5 or more dwelling units per acre for allowed residential uses. And no dimensional standard for multi-unit dwellings shall be more restrictive than those required for single-family dwellings. So this is directing towns to allow 5 units of housing per acre in their residential districts.
So if you have a quarter acre lot, then obviously it's like 1.25 units.
1.2
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
A lot of them are one.
So it would
quarter,
end up
but
as
not
1.
Okay, so this is not eighth of an acre.
A fifth of an acre.
We did an eighth of an acre
That's what I
last
thought.
year, I think.
I think our math is getting a little.
You try, so
We-
you tried.
We tried
then-
and it got overwritten, but it passed out of this committee at an eighth of an acre.
What did you do for it?
So there was prior bills that attempted to establish requiring towns to allow development on 1/8 of an acre.
That's right, that was in the act it got parked in my committee. I
It,
think, the
it was
last
in multiple
week.
bills.
But it
Um,
was in the final bill that made it and was vetoed, I believe, wasn't it?
No.
It was.
So
That one got, it got separated,
And
part
actually
of
it was-
it got parked.
I think it was actually 2 or 3 years ago. What did pass
Yeah.
3 years ago was that you do existing small lots that are 1/8 of an acre, you require towns to allow them to be used. So it's not the creation of 1/8 of an acre that didn't pass, but existing small lots that are currently considered non-conforming.
Right, we allowed to, right,
Yes, towns have to allow them to.
thanks.
Yes.
That's interesting, even if it's like as big as this room?
I'm gonna be honest, I would need to look at the.
An eighth of an acre is.
So,
a lot.
but
Okay.
And,
I think I would have
and
to have water.
it has to have water and sewer. 'Cause
It has
we've
to be
had
on water.
issues-
Yes. it has
Okay,
to be
because
able
we've
to
had
connect.
issues with vacation homes on lakes that were non-conforming sizes, and we did a lot. But they're on septic or not.
And
Yeah.
being on water means the water main goes by the property and the property can be served. It
Correct.
doesn't mean there's an existing connection. Correct.
Yes, and I think that was a piece of what we did, was it that if it was an eighth
So
of an
the
acre.
language-
it would
The
be-
language in 4412 that is in statute is that, the municipality may prohibit development on a lot not served by and not able to connect to municipal water and sewer if either is true, the lot is less than 1/8 of an acre, or has a width or depth dimension of less than 40
Right.
feet. So that's existing in statute. I can give you the citation if you want to look at it. That is not being changed in this bill.
So there was one like that in my neighborhood. Both neighbors bought half of it, and they now have nice large lots. Could they rejoin those? And it was because it didn't meet current zoning code. It met zoning code when the original thing was done. Could they one buy the other out and sell it as a lot? And
Could
create a lot that is now 1/8 of an acre that wasn't allowed in RD2.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't know, because there's other
Okay.
information I would need to know.
Okay,
And
but
so
it,
what I just.
can you create a lot out of, I've got a quarter acre on my side and he's got a quarter acre on his side, or could you create 1/8 of an acre lot by each selling off a 1/16 of an acre, one to the other in the future? Because that would have some implications, good, bad, or indifferent, but.
So the statute I just read to you does not speak to that scenario. That would come into what the town has established in their subdivision bylaws. So that's a separate issue. It'll come up.
With the state of out loud. That is a good, we've gotten page 4. And
It's time for a break. Eating a lot.
so we'll just take